We're now on Daf Tezayin Omid Beis, and we're analyzing Rava's vacillation. Tolush Ulbasov Chibro Le'inyan Shchita Man. We've now established that the original status is Tolush, is a Chumrah as far as Avodah Zarah, and it's considered Tolush. So it's not Elohim Haharim. And we were Mekil. No, excuse me. And we were Machmir likewise with regard to Kabbalah's Tumah, that a machshir, in the case where he wants the rainwater to rinse off the kosel, that's considered kiyutan because the kosel was originally tolush. What about a shchita knife? And tashma. Now, I'm not exactly sure why the Gemara, in the name of Rava, vacillates. L'chora, those two chumros that we said should produce a kula in the case of validating the shchita because it was originally tolush. In any event, Toshma Hoya Tzur Yotim Kosel. So now you have something that in its original natural state, Bisheshis Mebreshis, it was Mechubar. So you have a flint, which is called a tzur, right, a sharp piece of stone, that protruding from a wall. Osho Yakana Ola Me'elov. Now, a Kana Ola Me'elov means that you have a reed that has a very sharp top point, but it's still attached to the karka, v'shachabo, shitasa psula. Now, take a look at the case of tzur. The case of tzur is that it was, just one second, what is the case of tzur? I said it was there in nature. Let me just see. So right now, the Gemara doesn't know what I already spilled the beans. At this point, the Gemara is understanding that Sur Hayotzim Nakosel the Brisa is talking about a case of something that was originally Tolush, and then he attached it. And yet, the Shchita is Psula. So apparently, we're not going to take the understanding of Rava that we presented on Amud Aleph that if it was originally Tolush, it remains Tolush even after he did an act of Chibur. But the Gemara rejects and says that it was this tzur, this flint, was attached to the cave from Sheshis Mebreshis in its natural state. So it was always mechuber. And if it was always mechuber, then you can't use it for shchita, it's possible. And dekonami, from the fact that we spoke about a kana, and a kana we said is a reed that's still attached to the ground. That's its natural state. It was always mechubar. The katani dumya the kana olame'elab shmamina. So at this point, the Gemara seems to be assuming that only if it was originally mechubar, then is it possible for shchita. And that was what we thought intuitively was correct. However, Toshma, now we have a brisa that says no, it's sakin b'kosav v'shachat. But right, this is a case where he took a knife and he attached it to a wall and he shechted with it. Shchita kshera. So that's very good because it was originally tolush, and Rava kept insisting that if it's originally tolush, even though now it's mechubar, it retains its status. The Gemara says shani sakin delo mevatale. In other words, if a person attaches a knife to a wall, he does it on a temporary basis. He has no intention to keep the knife there. He's just filling some sort of a passing need. And therefore, it could be that when you attach something that's tolush to mechubar on a permanent basis, then enoch hinami, it takes on the status of mechubar, and the shchita would be possible. But we're talking about a case of lo mevatale, of not sakin bekoso, means he put the knife and attached to the wall only on a temporary basis, not for permanent purposes. Toshma, what about the following brisa? B'mechubar lekarka shchitaso kshera. Now, how is it possible that b'mechubar the shchita is valid? We know that mechubar is possible. It's going to have to be a case where it was originally tolush, and it retains its status as tolush, even though now it's mechubar. Gemara says, "Name." That's not how you read the brisa. Dilma perushe kama farishle. When the brisa says b'mechubar lekarka, the brisa is talking about a case where it's only mechubar lekarka on a temporary basis. He has no intention of leaving it there on a permanent basis. My mechubar lekarka delo mevatel. He doesn't make it part of the wall. He's only he's getting benefits from the wall, but that's a temporary kind of thing. But enechinami, if, for example, he took a knife and attached it to a wall or some sort of stone that, flint that has a sharp edge on a permanent basis, enechinami, even though it was originally tolush, it might be possible. So it seems at this point, the Gemara doesn't really come to any definite conclusion. Yeah, he writes here in the name of the Rosh that the question remains unresolved. Omar Mar, we learned in the brisa earlier, not sakim v'kosav v'shachet ba shchitas ksher Omar Ravanan Omar Shmuel. Okay, so now there are two ways of doing shchita. Let's say you have a knife that you attach to a wall. You can either bring the animal under the knife, push it under the sharp blade of the knife, and that'll do the shchita. Or it could be the sharp blade of the knife is pointing upwards, and you bring the animal over the knife, and the knife shechts from the bottom up. I'll never forget when I was a youngster, I went to a certain summer camp, and they had, a learning hour every morning. So the Rebbe, I won't mention his name, was teaching us about shchita. So he grabbed onto my head. He was holding my arm over. I couldn't move. Anyway, and he demonstrated shchita, not with a knife, thank God. But anyway, so what is Shmuel saying here? Lo shanu. When do we validate the shchita? That's only shasakin lamala v'tzavra behem lamata. Right? So he brings the animal underneath the knife that's protruding, it's attached to the wall. But aval sakin lamata v'tzavra behem lamala. If, let's say, the knife is here with the blade pointing up, and he brings the animal on top of the knife, he brings the animal, right, I got it right. He brings the animal on top of the knife, and it checks the animal, is chayshinan sheme yidros. In this case, we're not sure whether he did a kosher shchita. Because what happens is when he pushes the animal over the knife, he sort of like puts his weight on the animal such that the neck of the animal is pressing down on the knife, and that's called drisa. Right? So we're afraid that he's not going to, shake the animal, push the animal in and out, left and right, in order to do a shchita, which means you have to be molichu, maybe you have to do a cutting action, but rather he's going to put the weight of the animal on top of the knife, and that's drisa. So the Gemara asks, "V'ktani." We have another brayse that says, "Bein shasak l'mata, but v'sav bein l'mal, ubein shasak l'mal v'sav bein l'mata." It's always kosher. So now we have a brayse that explicitly contradicts Shmuel, because the brayse goes as far as saying that even if the sakin is on the bottom and the animal is on top, nevertheless we rely on the shchita. Amar Rav Zvid litzadim ktani. You have to read the brayse as two separate sections. Sakin lamata v'tzavra behem lamala. What would you say about the case where the animal is on top? And it depends. Bitalush. If the knife was talush, then we're not afraid of drisa. The person was actually holding the knife in his hand, and therefore, when he poised the animal on top of the knife, he moved the knife forwards and backwards, so there's no drisa. But sakin lamala v'tzavra behema lamata b'mechuba. That's a case where he attached it to the house or the wall. And once he attaches it to the wall, even though it still has a status of tolush, then we could assume that since the animal is underneath the knife, that he would be molech umevi, he would bring the knife forward and backwards. So therefore, the brisa is reflective of the shita of Shmuel. Rav Papa gives an alternate answer to defend Shmuel from this brisa. Rav Papa be ofa de kola. We're talking about a bird. Oaf is a bird. And a bird is light of weight. So when you have a heavy animal and the animal is on top and the knife is on the bottom, Shmuel says we're afraid of drisa because the weight of the animal pushes down on the knife. But in the case of a bird, which is relatively lightweight, there we don't have to be afraid. And Rav Papa says that in the case of a bird which is light, then we're not afraid of drisa. And even Shmuel would hold that if the knife is on the bottom and the bird is on top, we could assume that his shchita was a good shchita. So now we're talking about this reed that's growing from the ground and has a very sharp point. Number one, ein shochtim ba, because it's mechuba. Number two, ein malim ba, and the Gemara is going to tell us why you can't use it for milah, because there's no requirement of tolush in milah. Ein mechatchem ba basar, why can't you use it to cut meat? Ein mechatzim ba shinayim, can't use it as a toothpick. Ein mekanchem ba, you can't wipe yourself with it. We'll see what that means. Ein shochtim ba v'atanya v'kol shochtin. We have a brayso that says you could slaughter with anything that's sharp. Bein bitzar, whether it's a flint, or bein b'schus, a piece of glass that has a sharp edge. Bein b'krumiyah shalkana. So here it says explicitly that you could use the stem of a reed to shech the animal. Or a papa b'simuna diagma. Okay. So there are now, according to Papa, two categories of reeds. There's a reed from the marshlands that's called an agam, and then there are general reeds. Now, why does Rav Papa single out the reeds from marshlands? And he allows you to use it. Apparently, the reeds in the marshlands are much softer and pliable than other reeds. He says these reeds, when they are dried, they can be used as cutting instruments. So I'm not sure exactly whether this is still mechubar or not. But anyway, you can't use to cut meat. And why is that? Rav Papa, in fact, mechatich kirvei dogim dezige, right? He would cut the innards of a fish with these stems of reeds. So the Gemara answers dezige. Zige means that we're afraid normally from the stem of the reeds that it has splinters. And if the splinters go into the meat and somebody eats the meat, he could cut himself badly in the innards. But in the case of fish, the innards of the fish he can see. They're transparent. And if from this reed there's a splinter in the innards of the fish, he'll just simply remove the splinter. And Rabbi Rav Huna machatik ba ofa derach. Rabban went even a step further. He would cut foul, meaning oaf, with the stem because the meat is soft, and it wouldn't cause the reed to be splintered off. Now, what's a mekanchim bar? You can't wipe yourself. You're afraid of splinters? Typically, mishum diomar mar hamakanech v'dover shal ur shal letis bo shinov noshros. Now, what does it mean, shinov noshros? He says that there are teeth-like tissues that support the rectum. So I guess the Gemara is saying, forget about splinters. We just know that if you wipe yourself with something that's flammable, that's or shaletispa, then somehow it's going to affect those tissues in his rectal area. So we're talking about the danger of splinters. And why? He's wiping the mouth of a wound. So that's not a good idea. Hakol shoftim uli olam shoftim. To go back to the Mishnah, we said that the Mishnah is very ambiguous. What does it mean? Hakol shoftim li olam shoftim. Hakol shoftim. Hakol b'shchita filu of. It doesn't refer to any type of person like Cherushos v'kod. It refers to any type of a creature that needs shchita, which includes even an oath. Nowhere in the Torah do we find that the Torah requires shchita of an oath. It's all Torah Shebal Peh. Uli olam shochtim. What does that mean, li olam shochtim? We are always permitted to slaughter and eat the meat. You see, Rabbosai, at a certain point in Jewish history, you weren't allowed to slaughter and eat the meat unless you brought it into the Beis HaMikdash as a korban shlamim, etc., etc. But slaughtering for the sake of your own enjoyment of meat is called basar taiva. And Rabbi Shmuel, he desanya that Rabbi Shmuel is of the opinion that originally the Torah prohibited basar taiva. By the way, this Gemara, just on the side, is the source for Rav Kook, the original Rav Kook of Rav Yitzchak, and others who were vegetarians. So in my family, we don't have any vegetarians. But what is the Jewish attitude towards vegetarianism? It's all based on this Gemara about basar taiva, because Rabbi Shmuel holds that initially the only time the Torah allowed you to shecht and eat the meat was only in the Mikdash, in Kodshim. Otherwise, it was basar taiva that was prohibited. In any event, Tisanya ki yarchiv Hashem elokecha es gvulcha kasher diber lach. Right, that the Torah is going to allow you to eat basar taiva when you come into the land of Israel. V'amarta ochla vasar, and the person will say, "I want to eat meat." Is Rabbi Shmuel Omer Laban Kosvel lahatir lehem b'sar taiva. Shevetchila nesel lehem b'sar taiva. Originally, the Torah, according to Rabbi Shmuel, prohibited eating this meat for the sake of just private enjoyment and consumption of meat. But once they settled in Eretz Yisrael and people lived in all parts of Eretz Yisrael, and to prohibit basar taiva and say, well, the only way you could eat meat is if you go all the way to the Beis HaMikdash and bring it as a korban shlamim, that was a little bit too much of a tircha. Is therefore mishikonsu nichnasu la'aretz utar lehem basar taiva. Frek the Gemara v'achshav shegolu. How do you know that now that we're not in? Because the whole pasuk that's matir basar taiva is only when you come to Eretz Yisrael. But now you're in Chicago, right? And the question is, are you allowed to eat meat in Chicago? Maybe not. Can't go to Ken's. They still have the jukebox there. Anyway, Maybe now we go back to the original status, which, according to Rabbi Shmuel, the Torah prohibited eating meat for private consumption for the sake of pleasure of meat. Therefore, the Mishnah had to go out of its way to tell you that liolam shoftim, even in Chutz La'aretz, even though you can't bring it to the Beis Hamikdash, and even though the original, like, ideal perspective of the Torah was not to allow you to eat, you're allowed to eat. Maskeflar of Yosef says, I need a Mishnah to tell me that I'm allowed to eat meat. Hi, liolam shoftim. First of all, let's read the Mishnah carefully. The Mishnah doesn't say about eating; it only speaks about shechita. V'od, and furthermore, meikar my time itzar. Why would the Torah originally prohibit basa taiva when they were in the midbar? Mishum dahavi mekar v'lemishkan, because they lived close proximity to the Mishkan, and it wouldn't be a hassle for them if they wanted to eat meat to bring a carbon shlamim. But my time at Ishtri, Mishkan. Clearly, afterwards, when they're no longer close to the Mishkan, like for example, they entered into Eretz Yisrael, and there were people who were far away, they were in Dan or Beersheba, and therefore they couldn't get to the Mishkan, to the Mikdash, is therefore the Torah permitted it. That's what Rabbi Shmuel derives from the Pasuk Yirchav Mimcha Gvulcha. And if that be the case, then certainly in Chutz La'aretz, it would certainly be mutter, because the only reason it was also l'chatchil is because you lived in close proximity to the Mishkan. Certainly goes without saying that today that we are so far away from the Mikdash, the Mishkan, we're no longer different than when the Torah was Matir Basar Taiva, when you came to Eretz Yisrael, you're in Dana Beersheva. So now we have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what the Mishnah meant when it told you that not a call, but let's say bechol uliolam shoftim. What's the olam shoftim? Elam Rav Yosef. Rabbi Akiva, the Mishnah reflects the sheet of Rabbi Akiva, which was quoted a little bit earlier. Nisanya kirchak mimcha mokom asher yivchar Hashem alkech lasum shmo sham v'zavachta mimkarcha mitzon umitzoncha. And now the Torah is talking about a place where Hashem chooses a place, and lasum shmo sham, and you're far away from that place. And then what does it mean that you're allowed to shecht animals? So what's the point here? The Torah is saying kirchak mimcha mokom is therefore v'savachta. What's the point? Rabbi Kiva Omer, not the way Rabbi Shmuel said it. Lo ba kosav el lesser vahem basar nechira. Whoa. Meaning you don't have to shech the animal in this Havamina. The Torah had to go out of its way, lafuke, to teach you, no, that you need shechita. You cannot just kill the animal, shoot it in the simonim. According to Rabbi Akiva, in the original state of the wilderness, then you didn't have to do shechita. This is the exact opposite of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel said, originally we wouldn't allow you to eat basar taiva because you were close to the Mishkan, and therefore we expect you to bring the korbanos and eat the meat from the korbanos. And Rabbi Akiva is saying just the opposite. That originally you didn't even have to do shechita. In the wilderness, you could just kill the animal and eat its meat. But now the Torah says that you came into Eretz Yisrael, you now have to do shechita. The Akshav Shegolu, now we go back into Golus, is therefore Yochel Yachsul et Teron Arishon. Maybe we don't need shechita anymore. because the Torah only required shchita when it says then you came into Eretz Yisrael, and v'zavachto you need zvicha. But now that we're in Chutzlars after Golus, maybe we go back to the original state of being. That what? That you don't need shchita and nechira is sufficient. Therefore, we needed this Mishnah. And what does the Mishnah teach us? Liolam shochatin. That just like the Torah required shechita once you into Eretz Yisrael, that is forevermore. There's never going to be a heter of nechira, and you always need shechita. And the Gemara says, "B'maika miflagi." Rabbi Kiva Sovar Basa Taivalo. It's a klal. Rabbi Shmuel Sovar Basa Nechira Lo Ishtere klal. Rabbi Akiva started with the assumption that there was never an issur to eat meat. Vegetarianism was not in the Torah's perspective. Eat all the meat you want. Not only that, the Torah even allowed you to kill the meat, shoot it between the eyes and then and eat the meat. Rabbi Shmuel is the other way around. Rabbi Shmuel's of the opinion that there was never even a hamamin in the Torah's mind to allow you to just kill the animal and eat its meat. You certainly require shechita. And if the Torah needs a matir, then the matir was to eat basa taiva. And now the Gemara is going to go through all the psukim here to try to support Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel, and this goes on and on. And in Mirz Hashem, this is our assignment for Shabbos Kodesh 250. And in Mirz Hashem, it's very good that now we're a little bit ahead of the game because, as you know, next week we're going to have 2 days of Yontif, so to speak. I don't mean that literally.